So thanks for the invitation. It's an honor to be here today and to talk with you about carbon business models. As Jan kindly mentioned, I'm representing the Carbon Opportunity Firm here today, and this is exactly what I want to talk to you about. So let me start with a little piece of passion here. So if you look at the team that I'm representing, you might find each and every one of us on a Friday night hugging trees, in the true sense of the meaning. But we believe that to really make an impact here, we need to talk numbers and just convincing people that they should be doing something good. This is nice, and maybe we have like 0.5% of the population really going ahead. We think we need to have 30, 40, 50, 60, 70. And to do that, we need to convince them with economic arguments. So what we basically do, and I'm basically only talking numbers with you today, is to say, what is the business case for carbon? What is the business case for a new product? How can I best tell my audience in a way, or my potential future customers, that they really need to apply my solution, and thus really spread market change that we so desperately need, I guess, all of us. So as a first point, what our vision basically is that people we're working with are realizing their opportunities. If beyond that they want to buy carbon certificates to offset, that's great, but this is where we really want to go. What do I mean when I say carbon? Generally, we're talking about two things. It's cost and it's revenues. We can think about cost and revenues along 4 different topics. If I look at internal optimization, something that most companies already get on their agenda, we're talking about energy efficiency optimizations. We've heard a bit about internal optimization programs for the workplace, for example. We've been hearing a bit about production optimization, which from our perspective is much more important. As like typically 80% of the savings lie in the production process, not in administrative work. We are talking, on the other hand, about renewables. So as a large company, I might think about looking at the marketing side. You all heard about IKEA putting up wind parks, for example. I might do that to really position myself well in the market and gain additional share. I might also be able to realize cost savings if I have plants around myself that I can leverage biofuels, for example, from, or biomass from, and thus really save incredibly on cost if I use the correct subsidy scheme. On the other hand, this is mostly an external point and an international question. I can think about, I'm starting on the right, carbon projects and carbon certificates. What we see there is that a lot of, especially the utility companies, come up with really new idea of distributing solar lighting in Ethiopia, for example, to thus benefit from carbon revenues on the one side, but also from marketing effects. The second marketing part, carbon and energy efficiency reporting, is roughly related to marketing as well. There's some first numbers we see. I guess you all realized after what unfortunately happened in Japan that for Greenpeace Energy, the sign-up rates grew for like, I think, 800% every day. These are crazy numbers. So we do see a marketing effect that really, really works. On the other hand, especially in Germany, we see a lot of pretty drastic tax schemes that are increasingly enforcing energy efficiency measures. The first step this takes is using more energy management tools. For us, this is like the first thing that you need in transparency to know where you want to start and where you want to start optimizing. But in general, this is becoming big, and this is also becoming very interesting for companies to then, in the end, realize their own opportunities. One question that we typically get is when you're talking to companies who are not really in the carbon area, they're like, for example, agricultural players who don't really think about all this stuff. This is like kind of crazy to them. They're like, doesn't this go away? Like, you know, Kyoto didn't, like the Kyoto Protocol is not going to be extended. Nobody says anything about it. Copenhagen was a failure. So why would I bother? And the more we work in this field, the more we're sure it's not going to go away. So why is that? I'm starting on the supply side. I don't need to talk to you about energy price projections. I don't need to talk to you about the impact that going out of nuclear is going to have on energy prices. To give you numbers here as well, if we look at what happened with EEG in Germany at the beginning of the year, we saw a pretty drastic increase. That is one thing that you can already kind of see in most people's pockets. Second point, demand. That's also very, very relevant in a venue like this. How is the demand going to change? Primarily, we have a lot of companies believing that the demand for green product is going to increase. Here again, we don't see a lot of strong numbers on this yet, but what we do see is that companies such as Walmart, Tesco start putting a lot of pressure along their value chain. We see the same effects in automotive. The automotive industry is going to be hit likely first with carbon footprint obligations. So as soon as they have to report not only on the utilization of gas in the end, but also on what is happening in the production process, they will push it through. And they've done it before with lean, and they're really good at that. So this is going to hit every other country in the world as well that supplies to an automotive player. So this, again, it's not going to go away, for sure not. Substitutes and competition. Here again, I guess we see how this conference is developing. So we see that more people are getting interested in the market, and more people are trying to play a role there. So it becomes a lot more interesting to differentiate yourself and to really stay. You might be the first to enter the market. You have to stay ahead of the curve for a long while and really offer something better all the time to then be the one who's being picked by your customers in a sense. Just one nice number on that as well. If you look at the funds that claim to be high tech or clean tech, clean tech is the right word. If you look at 2004, we had 7 clean tech funds globally. Now we have 117. And the number is probably already wrong, so it's going to be a lot more already. So there we see there's a lot going on there. And everyone has to become better, not only on cost, but also on the environmental impact. And we've been discussing this a lot over the past days. The point that for us is really interesting as well is the regulatory point, what's going on there. Again, even if the Kyoto Protocol will see no extension, not in Eastern Europe, with everybody expected, I guess, but also in the developing world, we see a lot of drastic movement coming out. Somebody yesterday mentioned China's new 5-year plan. And what they propose is radical, as China is moving ahead in the market. So they're introducing top runner programs for companies. They're basically shutting down companies that will not perform according to at least the minimum average standard over the next, I think, 5 years. So that is pretty radical. India might not move into carbon at all, but they're moving into an energy efficiency trading scheme. So you get energy efficiency certificates if you overperform to what you should be doing, and can then trade them. And the projections for prices for energy efficiency certificates is already much higher than we've ever seen in carbon markets. In Germany as well, or let me talk about the European Union. I think that has very, very briefly been mentioned yesterday. The European Union just gave out the statement for the roadmap to 2015. And the first thing, this was the first time ever we have seen a flexible regulatory environment put in place, especially in climate. So what they basically say is we will pursue regulations to get down to the footprint target that we want to achieve. And if you don't react, you as kind of us, all of us, if we don't react on time to get specific milestones in place and specific reduction limits in place, they will just increase the pressure with a new regulation. And they have a very fixed plan of when they start putting the plug and taking up more rigorous regulations. So the way for all of us and for all companies in the European area to really avoid becoming carbon-wise better, it's just the room is going away. And I think this is a very, very positive development, and we haven't seen such an alignment ever before in the European Union on anything that's closely related to the environment. If I look at kind of the audience here, the topics that I would like to discuss with you about is basically, it's 3 that we consider most important. The first one is, how can I create additional value to my customers, taking all of what we've just discussed into account. So how can I leverage everything that's happening here on my demand side in the end? Second question, how can I optimize internally, and do I really want that? So we often see the case that people don't really see the benefits and thus don't think it's worthwhile thinking about it. The third one, creating new products, and for that I'll take you through a very brief example on financial service providers, just to help or provide some understanding on why we see so many market gaps right now and why this whole market is so intransparent, and we feel that sometimes things aren't moving fast enough. There's very clear reasons to this, but sometimes looking at that helps a bit. So let's start out with additional value to the customers. In general, what we see, and the first thing people think about usually when they talk about carbon markets is, yes, carbon certificates. I wanna get carbon certificates, which makes a lot of sense. It's a bit complicated because we see very, very many different schemes all around the world. We see voluntary schemes, we see regulatory schemes, then suddenly something like the European trading system pops up, and it's kind of a mess if you haven't ever thought about this topic. The second one is regulatory issues. And there, if carbon certificates might be considered complicated, the regulation is really drastic. We sometimes see tax breaks, for example, in China for very, very specific products. So they basically give out a list of products that will be subsidized very dramatically, but it has to be this specific product on the list, otherwise it doesn't get a subsidization. We see CapEx subsidies in some countries, feed-in tariffs, of course, which is a good export model from Germany. And we see sometimes product guidelines that have to be taken into account. What we did, and I'm just giving you some examples here, we've been talking to a new technology supplier for a type of a biogas plant. What they do is they're applying a pretty radical new technology, and we did a little market analysis for them, just looking at IRRs over time, taking into account different elements of the business case, in fact. So when we start out with Germany, we basically see that the technology shouldn't be in place. If you look at standard tariffs, this is just not a profitable business model. Once we start taking into account a feed-in tariff, it gets at least positive, although not really interesting. If we then think about other subsidies that we have in the German area, especially looking at KWK, we do find that the business case starts getting very, very interesting. And on the side of additional opportunity costs or opportunity gains, if you think at selling part of the residual products out of this process, then it would get even more profitable. If we do the same thing for Russia, we see that the impact that we have just looking at carbons, like at the base case plus carbon certificates, doesn't really change a lot. You don't really have a feed-in tariff. You don't get any, not a lot of subsidies. You get carbon certificates, which have to be voluntary in this case, so it doesn't really break the case. Then in India, we even see that it's worse. And the main driver here, even if you take into account all other revenue streams that you might want to consider, is still that you have huge opportunity costs because the business model for them just functions entirely differently, and they have to compete for the biomass that they want to employ in their process, which we have to take into account here. So this kind of gives you a feeling that suddenly a very simple business of just selling a product becomes a lot more complicated. And there's several side effects we need to take into account to really say how far we can jump here. We did a similar thing. We just modeled something similar for wind, which might be closer to what most of you are doing. And we basically just took one wind turbine, highly specific, picked a couple of locations in the countries that you see on the left, just simulated that we put our windmill at this exact spot, simulating the generation capacity of that windmill, and then looking at electricity costs, feed-in tariffs, and then carbon price impact on the business case if you started generating carbon certificates. Here as well, I think it's pretty interesting to see how much the cases are distorted across countries. If you look at China with the feed-in tariff plus carbon certificates, that has been a long debate in front of the United Nations. The case is in fact pretty positive. Germany, of course, way ahead, but even UK is strongly fostering this whole area now with feed-in tariffs. So they're really testing and trying to change the regulations right now to move from a REC scheme, as they call ROCs, like green energy certificates, into feed-in tariffs that even closely reach German levels. As I mentioned before, the critical part here becomes more and more building up networks. It's not just about, I'm giving you this product and please run with it and be happy, but how can I, as a seller, increase my value proposition to the customer by taking other people into my boat and thus offering additional services. So for the biomass producer that we talked about earlier from Mexico, I'm very sure he has a very, very positive business case, but we need to start talking to local authorities. We need to start talking about buyers of carbon certificates and potentially early negotiations on what the price for them could be to have a sound business case. We need to talk about investors who get the idea of carbon certificates and feel that they can judge on subsidies also in other countries and a regulatory environment. So what Gina said this morning, from my perspective, is really critical to put all the different facets into one room, get everybody talking, and then build business models where everybody's profiting, what from our perspective is absolutely a possibility and a must even. Jumping to the next case, internal optimization. I'll cut a bit short on that one. Basically, I will now only be talking about production process optimization, nothing else. This is highly technical. What we typically see as a situation is the impact is highly underestimated. Over the past 4 years, we got into a stage where most large companies in Germany have thought about this. They typically take the low-hanging fruits, which is good. I would say they achieve improvement rates of 5 to 10% of energy costs in their production systems without really endangering anything. What they don't do, and that is just a very typical learning process, they don't systematically and rigorously analyze also their production patterns and take energy as a core component and a core resource into optimizing their production processes. We've done that for years with capital, we've done that for years with work, and it's only starting for energy. So typically, if we take that into account, we see that we get at least another 10% in savings of energy costs without endangering anything or bringing instability into the system, and with payback rates below 2 years, which is acceptable for all German corporate investors, and typically. Part in this is the lack of the energy consumption information. So even for large automotive players, for example, we get a number for the entire plant. By now, we sometimes get numbers for segments, but we don't know what the major energy utilizers are, and we don't know how they depend on load factors and on variability factors. The last point, and I think for that is really interesting when we're talking about sustainability, software, etc., are the management structures in place? Is there really an understanding of what the core drivers of energy consumption are? Is that broken down across the entire hierarchy? And does the person at the top of an enterprise really know where he has to focus and then really push changes? From what we see, they might do it for a plant, but they don't do it holistically across countries, and they don't do it across all functions of the company, in a sense. So there's still some way to go. Why do we think it's definitely worthwhile going there? We differentiate 3 types of enterprises. One is energy-intense enterprises, the ones that have been regulated for years now, that are under the European trading scheme. So chemicals would be part of this, steel, aluminum, etc. They have been moving quite a bit on this field just because it's so expensive for them and so incredibly important. What we see here is that if you do it right, you get margin improvements, and most of them don't have strong margins, of up to 25%. And that's average statistical data, so it gives you an idea of how broad the range could possibly be. If we look at high margin pressure companies, automotive coming to mind is a branch that's just recently getting out of the crisis again, and that has been margin constrained for years, even before the crisis. We see impacts of up to 9 percentage points. Last one, consumer goods, it's still 3 percentage points. If you compare that to just doing traditional optimization efforts, such as cutting labor, and just imagine how hard that is to do in Germany from a publicity standpoint, and just thinking that this is just money lying on the floor, kind of makes sense to go there and to at least look at that. One last point on new products and financial product development. We've been recently approached by a bank with regard to whether we could help them develop an energy efficiency financing mechanism, as it was kind of hard for them to understand what's really going on in energy efficiency, especially if you look at production processes. So as has been mentioned before, we're really talking technical stuff here. It's nothing that you can just do by talking about it. So what we've done is we just looked at the production process and just imagine that the red box, in a sense, is the new EE investment. Let's say it's a heat exchanger. That's something it could be. Usually you invest, as a bank, you invest into the production process. And you know, if I put a specific device there, it's going to be productive, and I see that there's a product directly correlated to coming out of that. If I do that with an energy efficiency investment, it doesn't do anything, really. It potentially produces some additional flows, such as some energy or a bit of warmth, but that's about it. It doesn't do anything else. So I still bear all traditional risk. I bear country risk, I bear company risk, I bear a production process risk, a sector risk, and now suddenly I'm bearing an additional thing risk, so an investment risk that is unassociated to everything else, and that might take into account entirely new business dynamics. So how do I know what happens if this thing is not operating anymore? Can I still sue the guy who sold it? If I sue him, what happens then? Will I have a bankrupt company in front of me? I don't know. Another point, if that staff behavior is a very, very critical point in most energy efficiency optimizations. So assume we say, put this thing up there. It's a very, very worthwhile investment, and it will give you a profit of 13%. I would say about 3% depend entirely on staff behavior. So if this company doesn't have in place good maintenance strategies, preventive maintenance, for example, I might not see the impact that I want to see. How, as a bank, do I control operating management processes in a company? I don't. It's just not what I'm good at. Looking at energy contracts, there's another risk to it. What do I know what the company has as energy contracts? So even if I do contracting solutions and pay somebody else, if the energy price isn't fixed, I might have substantial changes. If the energy price is fixed, I might forego quite a lot of energy potential from my side as a bank in savings. So accounting controlling, that's where it's getting totally messy. How can I always tell what exactly are the drivers behind savings in a production process? Let alone measuring that is really difficult. So we find that without really putting everybody around a table and building a lot of technical knowledge also in banks, and that's the same for venture capitalists, if I may say so, without doing that, we will never be able to create and really get this new market going in the end. As a very quick sum up, I guess from our perspective, one of the core barriers is that it's a really complex topic. And I think it's a huge benefit because this is one of the market segments that requires getting everybody around the table. But in doing so, it also means it's so complex that one person alone or one group alone can't solve it anymore. We see strong differences across regions, across sectors sometimes, so this is not going to go away. We just learned it, if very simplistic. If we just look at carbon markets, we will get more diversity globally, so this is not going to go away. We have a highly dynamic environment, which is still going to be like that. Somebody mentioned, I think yesterday, that regulators are kind of trying things, and this is in fact what they're doing. And we sometimes have bad experiences in the market, which is sad, just because this overarching picture is still missing of where should I best optimize. So people try out different things, and they realize it doesn't work and are frustrated with the topic and the idea and will never, ever buy a green product again. So that's another very important topic about general education. What does it take? Really think about the potential at hand, which is huge from our perspective, get a holistic perspective, and follow very, very rigorously energy price development, regulatory developments, and really build your networks across the markets. Thank you.
Wonderful, Nicole. Great. Do you have a question for Nicole? If yes, please raise your hand and wait for the microphone. Ankit is a question man today. Okay. I think he took over.
Well, I'm lucky then. Nicole, my question is like, when we say we make a business model, a business plan, yeah, and we are approaching a VC now, then most times they talk about exit strategy. It's so much part of the idea pitch as well. And if somebody is really doing such a business, wants to do, is motivated to do, there's a lot of passion and motivation behind it. Mm-hmm. And maybe somebody doesn't have any exit strategy, you know, and then what impact can it cause from a VC perspective?
I'll try my best to answer on that. I guess there's a lot of VC representatives in the room who will be able to give a better answer. I would generally say, from a business stance, develop an exit strategy. There are so many companies and exit opportunities out there right now, and so many companies and very internal strategic discussions on where they want to go. So we heard earlier for the biochemistry case, there's, I think, a lot of potential out there, and I wouldn't see a lot of companies not really thinking about where they want to go. So try to define companies that might be interesting exits. That would be a first start from my perspective, and one that I hope should be convincing. But I'm happy to have the audience answering here as well.